Everyone, Megan here from The Wandering Goose, getting ready to do the next installment of our subscription box. So this project is going to be for your St. Patrick's Day insert for your basket. I'm just grabbing some painter's tape. I'm going to roll the ends so that sticky side up is going up on top of my table. Helps keep all these little tiny pieces down. I'm going to start sorting all the pieces by color. Group all the same colors together that you're going to be painting. Makes it a little bit easier for organization. Some of the things you're going to need for this project is going to be a sponge if you have one, some paintbrushes, a paint palette, some water, scissors if you have a sponge, and then the colors that came with your kit. You'll also need your choice of glue. I prefer to use the super glue. You can also use wood glue if you'd like. Just remember that wood glue is going to take a little bit longer for everything to cure. Super glue is a little bit faster and everything sticks where it's supposed to be quicker. Colors we're using for this project is cotton white, the chocolate brown. We're going to use a couple greens. The first one's going to be kudzu, caviar black, use a little bit of the Colonel Mustard yellow, and then the darker green of palmetto. You'll also have in your kit a small little batch of the Moonshine Metallics gold that you're going to use that on top of other colors to create a gold shimmer for your coins and the horseshoe. In my projects, I always try to start with the light colors first. So we're going to start with the white, just dabbing a little bit of white paint onto my sponge, dabbing off any of the excess, and we're just going to use it to go on top of the words for end of the rainbow that's going to be attached to the sign. We're also going to use the cotton for the little tag. When you're doing the tag, to make sure that you don't have too much paint on your sponge. If you have too much paint on your sponge, it's actually going to fill in the engraved lettering, which is something that you don't want to do. So I would say to load up your sponge with very minimal amount of paint. It's easier to do multiple coats of the paint than it is to try to get the paint out of the engraving parts of the lettering. So just very minimal paint, dabbing straight up and down. Try not to fill in those letters. Next color we're going to be using is the Colonel Mustard. This is going to be the base coat of our coins. Going ahead with the sponge, I still have a little bit of white on my sponge, but the white actually kind of helps the yellow to not quite be so transparent. So I don't really mind too much that there's a little bit of yellow or white still on my sponge. So we're going to go ahead and use this for the buckle for the hat, as well as the coins. I'm using a very minimal amount of paint so you're not filling in those score lines that give the detail of the coins. Just dabbing straight up and down with it. While we still have our yellow sponge, we're going to go ahead and dip part of our sponge into the yellow and then the front half of our sponge into the white. Blend the two colors together, and we're just going to use this to add a little bit of highlighting on the tops of our coins. So just going around the outside edge, keeping the white edge to the outside, the yellow edge to the inside of the coins, blending a little bit, creating some highlighting, just dabbing very lightly on the edges of the coins. Once we've done all of our highlighting that we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and cut the end off of our sponge, creating a nice blank sponge, and going ahead to move on to our next color. For our next color, we're going to choose the lightest green, the kudzu green, and we're going to use that on our shamrock. Once our shamrock is covered in the kudzu green, we're going to add just a tiny little bit of white to it, Still using our green sponge, just dipping it a tiny bit into the white. And just going to add a little bit of highlighting to the tips of the, not quite petals, tips of the clover. Once we finish with the kudzu green, we're going to move on to our palmetto. It's up to you if you want to cut your sponge as you're going between the two shades of green. We're going to just dip in a little bit of the palmetto and just use it on top of the hat. Make sure you go far enough into the clover cutout piece so that there's no wood showing. Once you layer the clover piece on top, it'll cover any of the wood, but you just want to make sure that you go over far enough just to make sure there's no bare wood. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the bottom of the hat. Same color, same palmetto green. And again, you're going to want to go over far enough so that there's no wood showing by where the coins get added on. This green can be kind of tricky to work with sometimes. You may want to let it dry and do a second coat, or you can leave it as is, depends on however you want it to look. Once you finish with the hat, I wanted to jazz up my Lucky You tag a little bit. You can either leave it the plain white as is, if that's the way you like how it looks. I decided to go ahead and add just a smidge bit of green to the edges. So as I go through this video, I am doing a little bit of work on this. So at first I started just doing a little bit on the edge, and then it was a little bit too messy, weirdly enough, for what I had preferred. So as you watch this, I'm going to keep playing with it and adding a little bit more green to it until I get it the way I want it to look. So right there, my lines aren't looking the way I want them to, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to soften them a little bit with just a paintbrush with a tiny, tiny bit of water on it. And the water is going to just activate that paint and kind of soften the edge. So this was my first attempt of making this look the way I want it to. This won't end up being the final product, but this is a way you can work on softening your edges if it ends up being a little bit too chunky for you. Just using a little bit of water, reactivating the paint, softening the edges. Adding a little bit more water. I'm just trying to create a more or less just a like a green shadow on my tag. Here I'm using a little bit of a paper towel to kind of blot the reactivated paint, kind of soften that edge, trying to blend it a little bit more. And as you can see, I barely have a little bit of green along the outside edge. I decided to go through with my sponge and try again, just doing around the edges, trying to blend it a little bit better than I did the first time. Once I finished doing my edges, I decided I wanted to take just the tiny, tiny bit of green that was still left on my sponge and kind of just go through the center of the tag, adding a little bit of green through the whole thing, just to give it a little bit of a different look than what I normally do. The next color I'm working with is the chocolate brown, and for this I decided I wanted to make the sign more of a stained look, so I don't want just a straight paint on my brush. I wet my brush first, just a little bit of water, and then I use just a little bit of paint, And as you can see there, you can still see all of the wood grain lines and the wording and stuff on my little sign. The more paint you have on your brush, the darker it's going to be. I tend to go a little bit lighter with it to start, and then I darken it up if I want. And the same thing with the post for the back of your sign. Just using a little bit of paint on my brush. My brush is still slightly damp from when I stuck it in the water. And then don't forget to do the little top piece of the sign, because that will be shown. I'm just adding just a tiny bit of brown with just a little bit of water, just to blend those out. And the nice thing is, if that is too light for you, you can always let it dry and go back and do another coat on top. Here I'm just going to add a little bit more of the brown to the edge. Kind of blend it out with my finger a little bit. Just giving it a little bit of shadow. Doing it along the side, the edge, the bottom edge. Just kind of blending a little bit, making it a little bit darker in some spots, just like wood would be. Next color we're going to be using is the Caviar Black. The only place that's really going to be used is on the, I used it on the belt, I guess, of the hat, the decorative part, the hat band, I guess, of the hat. So we're just going to paint that with the black. Again, the black can be kind of a funky color. So if it's going on a little bit too light, let it dry and you can add a second coat to it. You can either do this with the brush or the sponge, whichever is easier for you. The next color you're going to be using is going to be your metallic gold. So the metallic gold is a very transparent color, so it's going to depend on what you have underneath it to what kind of shade it's going to have. So as you see, I'm going to use it for the horseshoe and for the coins. And I'm going to use it with the sponge because, again, I don't want to fill in any of those score lines that we have, so the sponge kind of goes over top of it. You're going to dab into your gold and then dab straight onto the horseshoe. So the horseshoe is going to be painted right on the backer. And I didn't put any color underneath this, so this is going to be gold going over top of the naked wood. It's going to give it just a metallic little sheen to it, a little bit of color, but then as you see, I'm going to do on top of the coins, it's going to look very different. So the coins are going to have more of a yellow color to them because they have the yellow underneath. And it's going to have just some gold shimmer to it. You're going to be very light-handed with your gold. Just enough to give a little bit of shimmer and to not fill in any of those score lines. Be sure to put the gold on your belt buckle as well. And then here I wanted to add a little bit of shimmer to the edge of my hat. You can go as far as to just do that, like I did here. But as I go through in this video, I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of shadowing to it as well. So you can either stop here with just adding a little bit of gold to the edges, just whatever was left over on your sponge. Don't want to go too crazy-handed with it, just enough to give a little bit of shimmer. Or you can keep following along with what I do on the video. There you go, you can see the shimmer a little bit. And I decide to, while my sponge still has the gold on it, I'm actually going to put a little tiny bit of black on my sponge. Just a tiny, tiny bit. I'm going to blend those two colors together, the gold that's already on there with the black. And I just dipped in a little bit of the green, the original palmetto green that we used for the hat, just so if I got a little crazy, it matches the color that is on the hat. So leaving my sponge so that the black and the gold is on the outside edge, the palmetto green's on the inside edge, just going around and giving a little bit of shadow. As you can see, it still has a little bit of the shimmer to it from the gold, but it has a little bit more of the black for a shadow. Making sure I get that little piece there. Just a little bit of black and gold, just to give a little shadowing. While I have just a tiny bit of the black and gold still on my sponge, I decided to add a little bit of a darker shading to the edge of my tag. Again, completely optional, just trying to add a little bit more dimension with my colors. So just adding a little bit of shading to the bottom of the sign piece, and I mean just a little bit. I'm not going too crazy with this. Just adding whatever was left on my sponge from having a little bit of black on it. Just adding a little bit of shading to the edges. Here I'm taking a slightly damp brush and I'm swirling it in some white paint, just a smidge of white paint. Less is more. And I'm using it on my finger to flick downwards and just adding some speckles of paint to all of my pieces. Less is more, so you want to do just a little bit at a time. Take a look at it, see how you feel about it, and if you want to add more, you can swirl your brush around in the wet paint, the wet white paint again, and just add a little bit more. You only want to add a little bit at a time though. It's really easy to be heavy-handed with it. Once you're happy with the way all of your pieces look with the paint on them, if you have a fine white paint pen, now would be the time I would suggest to go ahead and add any of the accent lines. So I just add a little bit of accent lines, a couple dots here and there to all my pieces, just to give them some dimension. Accent lines are completely optional, and you can put them wherever you want them to be. There's really no rhyme or reason of how they look, just whatever looks good to you. There's been a couple times I've added accent lines, didn't really like them, so I end up actually painting over top of it and then trying again. So as always, it's just paint. Don't like it, paint it over, try again. Once all of your pieces are finished, I suggest doing a dry fit of all your pieces to make sure everything looks the way you want it to, and then you can go ahead and gluing. For this one, I started gluing with the sign piece first, making sure it lines up with the backer. If you have wood glue, it's going to take a little bit longer for it to set before it's dry. With the super glue, it only takes a couple seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, and I'm going to keep going with the rest of my pieces and just kind of gluing them in place as needed. For your extra coin pieces, it's up to you where you want to put them. I decided to add one to the front just to give a little dimension to the pile of coins. And then I'm going to use the other two and I'm going to add them to the back. So you're actually going to be putting glue on the fronts of them and attaching it to the back of your piece. So here I'm just trying to give it an idea of where I'm going to need glue. It's better if you dry fit it first so you know where you need to put the glue. But here I'm going to add glue to the front so that I can attach it to the coin pile and the signpost at the same time, just making sure everything's lined up. And then for the second coin, it's going to end up being glued to the coin pile and to the back of the hat. Try not to get glue on yourself. Never fails. I always end up with glue on my fingers. Just adding a little bit of glue there and holding it in place until the glue sets. Once you have all of your pieces, if your basket is one of the ones that needs a little bit of extra support, a little bit of extra thickness to it, you can go ahead and add your back tab to the back of the little tab that's going to fit inside of your basket. And then you're going to take your string and put it through the holes of your little tag. Loop it through, to put the two ends through the loop so that it's attached to your string. And then you're going to go ahead and just tie a little knot in it. And then once you're ready to put it in your basket, that knot is going to hold it in place through one of the notches on the bottom. Here I'm deciding to use the brown side of my basket instead of the white side. So you're just going to take your little tag. It's hard to do this on camera, but you're going to just stick it so that it's through that little notch there that's on the bottom, right underneath the hat, and then the knot will keep it from falling through. So there you have another basket. Thanks so much for watching. See you next month.